Welcome back. I've got Doug Drysdale on the line. Doug, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Michael. Thanks. How are you? Good to see you.
Great to see you. Really, really looking forward to this conversation as we talked a little bit in the pre-show about this. So, why don't you share a little bit about you, your company, and then we're going to jump into this very important conversation around mental health.
Yeah, happy to do that. And thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're doing. Like my background, I spent 35 years building drug development companies of some form or other. In the first half, largely through kind of R&D licensing, partnerships, co-developments, those kind of things. And then later through larger transactions, lots of M&A. I've acquired 15, 17 companies, something like that. So building companies organically. But the most rewarding, I think, for the last sort of 16 years or so, I've been the CEO of four different pharma companies, different types of companies, from a generics company I co-founded, a spec pharma company, a CDMO, a contract manufacturer, Cybin, now a biotech company. Two of those were startups and two of those were turnarounds. Two of them were public and two of them were private. So it's a real kind of mix of things. But definitely, I can say that the most rewarding has been the opportunity to grow teams and pull those teams together to deliver things like we're doing at Cybin. And I think that in all of my career in drug development, um, for the most part, it's inevitable that drug development is incremental. We make incremental steps. Science is incremental. We learn a little bit more. Each new product is a little bit better than the one before. But I think for the first time in my career with Cybin, we have something that has the potential to be a real paradigm shift, a massive leap forward, moving away from daily treatment of the signs and symptoms of, say, depression to a more of an interventional treatment that has the potential to rapidly fix depression, remove depressive symptoms. And after just a couple of doses, most patients are seeing benefits lasting at least a year so far in our studies. So a real paradigm shift in the treatment landscape, which is obviously kind of a once in a career type opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. And as I shared with you during the pre-show, and I've shared this on interviews before. I don't know if I've mentioned it on my show though. I'll have to mention it. But I've dealt with burnout in my life and also clinical depression, and was on depression medication for about a year, and was able to successfully wean myself off of that through help with my physician and with therapy and whatnot. But that was a year of my life, and on average, you only get so many runs around the circle, and for me to have to deal with something like this over a year, and I know many people that suffer with depression. It's been a lifelong battle to see the results that you're seeing is I get excited about just thinking about it because I know what depression did to me. I know what it does to people. It robs them of themselves, and of course that always passes through to where they work, their families, their friends, relationships, every aspect of it. In society suffers from that. When people lose great people because they're depressed and they're not themselves and they're not able to contribute the way that they want to or used to, society suffers from that. So, that's why, it's so important for us to get you on the show, because I want to talk about, this. And obviously, I don't want to ignore the fact of your career, and a question that came to mind as you were walking us through what you've done all these years is, I don't want to guess that you've seen it all, but you've seen enough, I think, as you're navigating through the landscape of getting approvals and investors and all these other things, that you can kind of sense what the next question is going to be, the next step's going to be in order to get things approved or clinical trials or anything like that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, first of all, I'm glad you managed to work your way through that challenging time. In some ways, you're lucky that it lasted only a year. Many patients, as you know, find themselves having to turn to antidepressants because the depression needs some help. And then once they're on those antidepressants, struggle to get off of them. Not necessarily that they're addictive, but that they become dependent. It's like a crutch, if you like. And so, and people, as you said, rightly so, people end up spending many years on these treatments, and it was never they were never designed for that. So, and then the other aspect is not just patients, but when we talk to psychiatrists in our studies, uh, it's incredible to see these 20, 30-year psychiatrists who had kind of gotten to a point where they resigned to the fact they had nothing that they could help their patients. So suddenly they're seeing them motivated and energized because suddenly they have new tools that can actually change the course of disease and not just mask the signs and symptoms. Yeah, look, drug development drug development is challenging. Drug development is complex, more complex than most retail investors appreciate. Clinical trials are complex. Our first phase 3 study, 40 sites in a dozen countries, and that brings a huge amount of complexity, as you can imagine. And all of that goes on behind the scenes, and the public just sees the outcomes of it. So we're very fortunate to have a really strong team that has developed 60 plus INDs with FDA, many mental health treatments. The team's had something like 37 exits between them. So that means, I think that's a good sign. It shows that they're able to create value for themselves and for investors. But more than anything, this is a cause that really motivates people. So I think pretty much everyone on the team is here because of a personal motivation, a friend, a family, a loved one that has dealt with one of these challenges. So there's that personal motivation, but we're also quite competitive people. It's interesting to me, always interesting to me, that drug development seems like it's glacial and really slow, but actually it's kind of like swan management. Smooth on the surface and paddling like hell underneath. And we're frantically working around the clock to keep things on track. And it's a very competitive group, kind of like a competitive sports team, each contributing their all and also each supporting each other. So we're very fortunate to have the group, and I think the collective insight helps us anticipate what's coming next. As you rightly say, that's the critical in any kind of business, is anticipating what could happen next on the positive side and the negative, and then planning for the next milestones. How do you move the company forward with each of the next steps?
Well, it's important. And as you were talking to, I started thinking about, all of the regulatory things. Of course, you've got the FDA. That's just talking about the U.S. This is a global product, so you've got all the different variances on that. And even in the states, you've got 50 different states, and and licensing and testing and all these other things. It's it's a situation. It's like we're just trying to create a treatment, but you end up spending more time on the administrative side of things. And, to your point, that the modern investor doesn't necessarily understand that. It's like you're making this new drug or medicine to solve a problem. Okay, they just have visions of labs and scientists. Like, no, well, the mountains and mountains of paperwork to submit that have to be reviewed, working with legal and navigating all of that and translation. And it's a big monster. But it's having said that, you're not letting that get in the way. You're like, okay, we know that's part of the game. We have to do that, but it's important for us to do that because even what you said a moment ago about psychiatrists who have been basically there's a crease in their chair that they've been sitting in because they haven't had to move much because there's only so much that they could do. Now all of a sudden they're like, we've got this new tool that could actually help people really fast. And what that does, just thinking about this from a billing standpoint for a moment, for a doctor or a psychiatrist, the more people you can see, the more revenue that generates. So if you can build up your practice because you're able to help people and get them in and get them out, you're going to have more opportunities to do that. That's just one little side effect of it. I mean, that's not your primary goal for your organization, but that is one of those positive side effects is
Oh
we're
yeah.
helping people.
This treatment has the potential not just to help patients, but to help the entire mental health care system. Um, Depressed patients are quite a high touch, 6 or 9 visits a year to their physician, as you'd expect, they're trying to tweak the dose of the medication, or maybe they're switching to a different one because they can't tolerate the previous one, or they're dealing with side effects like insomnia and they want something for that. Um, or they're more likely to have increased blood pressure, more likely to have diabetes, for example. So there's lots of comorbidities and lots of system interaction. Um, the other aspect is that we have a pretty limited number of psychiatrists in the US and in pretty much everywhere, actually. And only about 18% of psychiatrists are available to see new patients because these patients take so much time. Um, and an average wait time for a new visit is something like 40 to 70 days, depending whether you want a virtual visit or an in-person one. So when you think about what we're trying to develop here is an opportunity to dose patients once or twice and then keep them out of the system for at least a year so far, we're seeing in the data. That means no going back for dose adjustments because patients aren't taking any daily meds. No going back for side effect tolerance because they're not taking daily meds. No going back for comorbidities because they're not taking daily meds. And so keeping them out of the system frees up all these other resources for new patients. I mean, even in the interventional psychiatry space, where we see treatments like ECT, TMS, esketamine, Spravato, in these interventional psychiatry centers, those are high frequency treatments. Esketamine dosed 26 times a year, so patients are coming in every 2 weeks. That's pretty tough on these centers that have very limited space. So if we can reduce 26 visits to two, these sites can see a lot more patients. We can deal with the problem a lot more efficiently.
Agreed. And we know the stats of, people that are really struggling, just, case in point, I saw a stat the other day, it's, we're just at the time of this recording, we're just ending, the holiday season. So there's a lot of people that'll be getting their credit card bills in the next week or so. And there's financial stress, and the stress
Mhm.
causes depression because they feel bad about overspending, or they feel bad that they can't, make the payments on time. And of course, that can get you down a rabbit hole of depression and anxiety and self-doubt and all of these things. And a lot of this, I mean, a lot of people, especially when I was going through it, you realize that a lot of that is just your brain chemical challenges and whatever that's adding fuel to the fire type of situation. And to be able to take that and not quote unquote mask it with the pills that I was taking for a year, but to actually have something that can adjust things and correct it where, like you said, a visit or two, and all of a sudden I'm good for a year so far. Because it changes things. And again, it opens up the door because, again, I see so many people just in my daily walk of life where I could tell people are having a tough go of it. And I don't know necessarily what the reasons are. I do know that they're having a tough go of it. And I don't, my hope is that they'll be able to get the help that they need. But as you said, there's a long wait list to talk with a mental health specialist, even with the advent of remote therapies and whatnot. There's still a wait period. And then, of course, there's cost involved and all of that, where, you know, the work that your team is doing and the innovative work that it's been doing is creating an opportunity for people to get this help a lot faster, a lot healthier. You don't have to worry about, okay, well, we're giving you this, but now, your A1C levels are going through the roof, or, oh, congratulations, you're going to bust the heart, rate, and your watch is going to be yelling at you because your blood pressure is going through the roof. You won't have that. And I used to work in primary care as an executive, so I see the patients coming in, and I know the challenges they're having, and a lot of it is basically playing whack-a-mole. And that's tough on a doctor because they have to figure out, all right, what are all these different combinations of things? And to be able to use, what your team has come up with, again, it excites me. I'm thrilled that, the work that you've done, and obviously you're leveraging all the experience you've had, but I'm thrilled for this because I know what this means for humanity. If we can get people away from being depressed and help reduce anxiety and other mental health challenges, people will be happier and healthier. And what a world will that be when we can get there?
Yeah, no question. And obviously there's a big link between metabolic health and mental health. Um, we know that what people eat affects their mental state. The metabolic health or poor diet leads to reduced mitochondrial function. That leads to reduced mental function because we have 3 times as many mitochondria in our brain than we do in the rest of the cells in our body, and vice versa. When people are depressed, it affects their metabolic health as well for similar kind of connected reasons. So the two are kind of hand in hand. It's hard to fix your metabolic health and all those other things like diabetes, as you mentioned, if the mental health isn't on track, and vice versa. So the problems run deep, and I think, as you said earlier, mental health is kind of like an infectious disease. It doesn't just affect that individual, but the loved ones, the carers, their colleagues, their friends. It's very hard to know how to help someone that is suffering. There's really nothing much that we can do, and certainly the old kind of snap out of it attitude clearly it doesn't work. Um, so we're very excited about the potential for this, and we're well into our phase 3 program now, focused on executing that. You're right, and you said there's lots and lots of hurdles and barriers. Simple things like drug scheduling, where every site and every vendor and every partner has to have a Schedule 1 license. Adds complexity, it adds cost. But we have a team of professionals, and we've been dealing with that for the last 4 or 5 years now, and we're just powering on through.
Yeah, that kind of leads into a question I was going to ask to towards wrap up is, you know, and I already kind of know the answer to this, but what's the long-term vision on this? From your standpoint, obviously I think this will spawn additional research in other areas as well. But what's the long-term strategy for the organization to navigate? And again, it helps when you have an all-star team that's done it before. It
Yeah.
it it, it it's not a case where nothing surprises you. It's like, okay, we know how to deal with this, and they do it. And I love seeing organizations that are made up that way because it strengthens the opportunity to quote unquote get things right. So, love to hear your long-term strategy.
Look, I mean, we're fortunate in that depression studies can be quite challenging, typically, in that when you're dosing patients every day with a psychiatric condition, and then you're comparing that to a dose of placebo, those placebo patients are getting some kind of positive input, if you like, or, so they're taking this placebo, some reinforcement, if you like, and so the placebo effect can be quite large in these studies, and then you get a failure to separate the active treatment from placebo, typically normally because these treatments have fairly small effects historically. We've got two things working in our favor here. One is we're seeing much, much larger effects, 8 to 10 times larger than with traditional standard of care, and we're not dosing every day in our studies, nor with placebo. So the separation risk is gone. We've seen just tremendous results in phase 2, 70+% remission rate, sorry, at 12 months, 100% response rate at 12 months after 2 doses. So going into phase 3, we've removed a lot of the risk. So now it's all about execution. When we think about the long term, this is just the beginning of a platform. So we know that these treatments very likely will be successful in depression, anxiety disorders, but there's plenty of anecdotal and academic evidence to show that there are many other conditions that these could be helpful for as well. Bipolar disorder, OCD, postpartum depression, cluster headache, migraine, neuropathic pain, substance use, opioid use, alcohol use. I mean, these are conditions that collectively affect in the US alone maybe a couple of 100 million people. So we're not talking about niche applications here. We're talking about mainstream applications on the scale of, the GLP-1s, Wegovy, etc. Ultimately, once we look a few years down the road. So our hope is to focus on this phase 3 approval in depression, and then leverage off of that experience and the impact we can have on the depressed patient community, and leverage that to help many more people with a lot of other conditions. and really try to change the mindset to move away from daily chronic dosing of pills every day to something that's more interventional. You mentioned whack-a-mole, and I think it's exactly right. It doesn't matter what condition you're treating, if it's depression or a cardiovascular disease or whatever, as soon as patients start getting polypharmacy, multiple pills, then it's about, okay, well, this one's causing this side effect, this one's interacting with this one's causing another side effect, and you're adding in more treatments to deal with the treatments that are trying to attack the underlying condition. So, one major benefit of all this is maybe let's break the cycle of relying on a pill every day. Patients have to come in and do a bit of work and have a couple of visits and take these treatments, but 2 visits could perhaps last patients for an entire year, free from all those medications. So I mean that's the vision, to create a platform, and we're very very excited about the opportunity to help not just depressed patients but all those other groups I mentioned as well.
Yeah, I look forward to people throwing away their pill dispensers because they don't
Mhm.
need them anymore. So I applaud your work and celebrate it, and I'm looking forward to, seeing all the great things that comes from all of this. So, Doug, love this conversation. Where can people find out more about you and all this amazing work you're doing?
Yeah, look, thanks for having me on, Michael. Enjoyed the conversation. You can always find us at cybin.com. That's cybin.com. And if you happen to be an investor, we're also traded on the New York Stock Exchange at CYBN as the ticker symbol.
And I'll definitely have all that information in the show notes. So, Doug, thank you and your entire team for your part in helping people get better. I applaud you and I really appreciate your time today.
Great. Thanks, Michael.